Good evening. I would like to introduce our distinguished guest, Rabbi Joshua Weisberg from Jerusalem, who will have a lecture about the intriguing, interesting theme of dreams and the unconscious in the Talmud, with the name that you may know the thoughts of your heart. And just a short introduction, Joshua Weisberg is a Jewish Talmudic scholar, so to say, teacher, also a professional chef, a guide, and lecturer. And there are really quite a lot of things about him, interesting things, and probably we will get to it sooner or later.
Right.
And so he was born in Canada, in a small town. He was from a mixed marriage, so to say, Catholic, Jewish. He started as a Reformed, in a Reformed community, but later converted to Orthodox. And he spent 30 years, or he has spent 30 years in Jerusalem. So he lives in Jerusalem with his wife, Jenny, Hannah, and with their 8 children who are raising you, actually.
Yes, they're raising us very well.
Who are raising you. So I think this will be.
He's our youngest child.
And one of the children we have here. So please, you are highly recommended to be here, and please, Joshua, the room is yours.
Thank you. Good. So nice to meet you. So my name is Joshua. It's true, I grew up in Canada, and when I was 18, 19, I spent a year in Israel. Tell me, speaking English at this speed is totally fine, correct? And I fell in love with traditional Judaism, went back to university in America, United States, and then came back to study Torah, Talmud, and Jewish mysticism, and I've been teaching for 30 years. A few years ago, I got a little bored and started becoming a professional chef and doing a filmmaker, doing some other things just for fun, but mostly what I do and love to do is teach Talmud. I teach many different groups around the world, Jewish, Catholic, Protestant, secular, psychologists. I run a seminary for young women in Jerusalem. So what I particularly enjoy is in this topic, which is finding something that all of us wonder about, think about, are confused by, and trying to identify Jewish traditional, authentic wisdom that then can engage conversation outside of just the Orthodox world. Hopefully I'll be able to do that. I wrote this up as an article. It's not yet professional grade academic with citations. It's just what I mean to say. So if you want afterwards, you can have a look, and I'll give you my email. You're more than welcome to anytime ask questions. I come back to Prague every few years. I'm the guest rabbi of the Jewish community. Every few years they invite me in, so if I come back, you can come join me for Shabbat dinner and we can talk about dreams and the unconscious. So when I finished this the other day, I sent it to my daughter, my second daughter, who's a philosophy student at university, and she said, "It's okay, Dad, but it isn't clear to me what you really want from this." Meaning intellectually, but what do you really want in your gut? She's a wonderfully difficult daughter in that way, challenges me. And that's a really good question, meaning why is this interesting? Is it an intellectual exercise? Is it just about creating a deeper language, or am I looking for something? So I've been thinking about her question all day, walking around Prague with my son. And if at the end you have any thoughts about what it might mean to you, I think that's an incredibly important question dealing with this. So I'm going to begin with just a brief preface. Have people seen this already? Did you get a chance to look at it, or not really? Get a glance. Okay. So in 1923, 1927, so Romain Rolland, who is a French philosopher and researcher of the Far East and won the Nobel Prize for Literature, so he wrote his friend Sigmund Freud in Vienna and asked him if he had an explanation for what he called an oceanic experience. It's a relatively famous question because Freud quoted it in his Civilization and its Discontents at the beginning. But the question is interesting, meaning Rolland knew about meditation. He'd studied mysticism for many, many years. But he wanted a Western language, and Freud representing the study of the soul in the Western world. So Freud wrote what he wrote back, which I'll get to if we have time at the very end. But the question itself, for me, is very interesting because I grew up in a different world from the world I live in today. I live in a world which is very Eastern. The Hasidic movement, which has a history in Prague. Kafka was very influenced by a friend of his who became Hasidic. The Hasidic movement is not Western. It's very profoundly Eastern European. Judaism itself is an extremely tumultuous mix of East and West. And that world influences me deeply. I pray every day. I pray often with very Eastern orientation. I do meditation influenced by Jewish tradition, and I study Jewish mystical sources. And still, I'm born of the West. I'm from Canada. My mother's from Germany. My father's from the United States. And so this idea, how do I express these experiences in a language that is coherent for me, is a really big question. And so that's what I'm trying to do with this. At the end, if there's time, I'll tell you a little bit about how Freud responded to Roland and why I think that's really important. I don't know if anyone's ever read Irvin Yalom. He's an American psychiatrist, outstanding psychiatrist. He writes about his patients, and a little bit like Oliver Sacks, you familiar? So they write the stories of their encounters as literature. He has, in the last story of, I think, his best book, which is Love's Executioner, he tells the story of a patient named Marvin, who's a very annoying, boring accountant with very annoying sexual obsessions, and is not an interesting person. And Yalom doesn't know how to deal with him. He likes drama, he likes split personalities, and he wants to hand over the patient to a student. But then Marvin tells him his dreams. And Yalom is blown away. The dreams are very sexual, very dynamic, very interesting. And he's blown away because the guy's boring. And so Yalom comes to the conclusion that this man is not telling him, he didn't write the dreams. It's his inner unconscious that is writing the dreams and telling them to Yalom as a way of bypassing the personality. So that image really grabbed me. Now, he's a bit over the top. He's a psychoanalyst. He's takes himself a little too seriously. But this image of an unconscious sending messages to an external interpreter in order to communicate with himself is fascinating in terms of who we are, levels of personality. What I want to do is take that opening image of a letter from the unconscious to an interpreter or to the person, but almost as if there's a persona inside, and ask whether there's a Jewish understanding of that dynamic. So would you like to go through the sources, or should I just mention them and then afterwards you'll look at them? Which one? Second? Or you want to actually see them inside? It's up to you. I'll mention them and you can have a look. But there's a page here with the sources. I'm not going to read them. It gets boring if I read. But so in the Talmud, should I explain what the Talmud is? Is that a good idea? Okay. Jewish tradition works like this. There is the Bible, which you're obviously in a theological institute must be familiar with. And there's the Jewish Bible, which has, from our perspective, 3 parts: is the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. And then the process of assimilating the impact of prophecy into the Jewish psyche, the Jewish mind, the Jewish culture, the Jewish religion and practice took place over many hundreds of years in a process of transferring prophecy to wisdom. That's, I think, the key word. Judaism believes that prophecy per se ended with the end of the Bible. Not that people don't have inspired moments of prophecy, but Isaiah did never come back. It's done. Moses never came back. That process of wisdom was accumulative. So there's a tradition. So people would tell, this is what this means, this is what we do, this is a question we ask. And that process of discussing prophecy continued and continued, and at periods in Jewish history were collected in, I don't want to bore you with the history, but the Talmud is the accumulation of Jewish conversation about everything. What does it mean? Why are we here? Who is God? What do we do? What is the Sabbath? Property law, everything you can imagine Jews wanting to talk about is in the Talmud, and it's a very compactly edited book of conversations put together in the year 500, more or less, and that is the defining canon of Jewish thought. For every religious observant Jew in the world today studies the Talmud, everybody. We discuss it, we talk about it, disagree with it, argue about it, and from that comes all Jewish thought today. Jewish philosophy, Jewish law, all come from the Talmud. And that closed at around the year 500. So if you want another class on Talmud, happy to do that by Zoom. We'll talk, and I'll arrange that. So in the Talmud, in one section of the Talmud, there is a series of 3 pages, which in the Talmud is a lot. It's a very dense book, of discussions about dreams. one of the statements that opens it up is a man named Rav Chisda. He's a 3rd century Babylonian scholar. And he said, a dream that is not interpreted, a dream that is uninterpreted, is like a letter unread. So, first of all, a dream uninterpreted is a letter unread. It's a puzzling statement because, first of all, he hints at a dream is like a letter. So we've got Yalom. We have this image of a dream not being accidental. It's intentional. Somebody's sending it. Somebody's supposed to receive it. It's in a language that both people speak, people or things speak. But he adds, so it's similar to Yalom, it also is, can be not read, which raises all sorts of questions we don't have to go into. But why do you send a letter to somebody? For many reasons. And why would you receive a letter from somebody? And why would you receive a letter from someone and decide not to read it? And Rav Chisda says, if you don't read the letter, it's like not interpreting the dream. You got the dream, but you can step away from it. So I want to divide this talk into 2 portions. The first is the first part, which is about what does it mean to receive a letter in Judaism in the context of dreams. And the second is, what does it mean to interpret a dream or not to interpret a dream? Okay? I'm going to pause for questions, and if I could have a little bit of water, that would be great. Is there any questions about anything? Now's a good time to ask. And nothing? You sure? Okay. So about the idea of where the dream comes from. So obviously, if you're a psychoanalyst like Yalom, what you're interested in is what is the inner persona saying about your needs, your fears, your fantasies, right? That's what you want the dream for, is to figure out what's going on in a person's mind during the day. Now, Freud decided, Freud acknowledged that there were multiple layers to dreams. He called theirs the Tagesreste, which is the things that happen during the day that happen to come into your dream, but they're not important. And then there's the underlying themes of your dream, which is what your psyche is really dealing with, and that is important. So last night, I write my dreams down. Last night, I dreamt that in addition to giving this lecture, I had to teach a class in Talmud on Zoom that I was unprepared for. So I got very anxious in my dream, and that always happens to me before I give a new talk. Anyone here who gives talks, professors, knows that feeling. Sometimes I dream that I come up and realize I'm naked, you know, the kind of thing like. So that's a combination of underlying anxiety. And the conditions of today, I happen to give a talk, which is not so important psychologically, but the fear is important psychologically if I want to understand myself. So the Talmud had a pretty good sense of that. The 2 stories, again, everything I'm quoting is here in the essay and the sources are here. I'm not making them up. If you want, I can send you the original. The Talmud has a whole bunch of stories of, sort of humorous stories of how the incidents or the accidents of the day impact what we, how we dream. So it tells one story, a man has dreams that he has sexual relations with another man's wife. So the interpretation is, well, it could be that sex is about connection and about ecstasy and intimacy and about bliss. So maybe it symbolizes for you your attainment of the world to come, of going to heaven. And because it's somebody else's wife, it means that you're going to have a very big piece of heaven. That's one possibility. I'm not commenting on the truth of the interpretation. That's what the Talmud says. On the other hand, it says, if you know the woman and you are fantasizing about her, then it's just fantasies. Meaning they know full well that your thoughts during the day are going to impact your dreams. The question is, can you scrape those away and discover something underlying true? And again, in that we're going to talk about in a second what that means. Another case is very entertaining. The king of Persia for a period of time was close to one of the rabbis. We know that this is also true historically. And they were very close. They were friendly. And one day the king said to the rabbi, he said, listen, you say you're so smart. He said, but I have a question for you. Can you tell me not only what I dreamed last night, but what I'm going to dream tonight? So the rabbi said, oh, that's easy. That's easy. He said, you're going to dream tonight that the king of Rome, the emperor of Rome, you know, Persia and Rome were always at loggerheads. The emperor of Rome is going to conquer you and make you grind dates in a golden pestle, mortar and pestle. That was a very terrifying dream for the Persian king because he's used to being afraid of the Romans. So all day he's thinking about this. And of course, at night, what did he dream about? He dreamed about because the image was already in his head. It doesn't mean anything. It was, and then, so that idea that dreams reflect the momentary anxiety is obviously there. However, we know from the Bible that dreams carry a kernel of prophecy. So we know this from Pharaoh. I remember I'm not going to test you, but you know Genesis. So you know Pharaoh, you know the baker and the butler and Joseph and Jacob, not Jacob less. Joseph have dreams that then come true in the story. So without going into them too deeply at the moment, we could, but it's this idea that dreams carry an articulation from God is very central to the Bible and in the book of Daniel. Interestingly, it's before prophecy and after prophecy. Once Moses comes through to the end of Jeremiah, there is no dreams. There's one, but there's very few dreams. It's before and after. But dreams carry a little bit of truth. And the Talmud says about that dreams are 1/60th of prophecy. There's a whole long discussion of different things that are 1/60th of other things. Fire is a 1/60th of hell, and so on. But dreams are 1/60th. Now that's an interesting image for me, because 1/60th means that the real thing is somewhere else. You brush up against it, you can have contact with it, but it's not fully there. It's a vision of like true pain, true joy, true bliss, true sweetness. Honey is a 60th of the manna. Remember the manna in the book of Exodus? So the statement is that you live your life, and when you feel that you've encountered something real, you're on the right path, but you're not fully there. It's a certain way of understanding life. But 1/60th is a very important number in Jewish tradition. This is something you might not know. 1/60th is the legal amount that something loses existence. Why is that? So far, everyone with me? Still with me? Okay. So you know what kosher means? I can eat something. It means it's fit to be eaten. So Jewish law prohibits meat and milk being cooked together. I don't know if you knew that, but I can't eat anything that has meat and milk put together. However, if I take a very little bit of milk, you can imagine what I would want, because I used to eat non-kosher food and I miss some of it, but if I had a little bit of cream put into a nice chicken soup or a beef soup, right? You're already starting to think about dinner. So if it was less than a 60th, it doesn't matter. It doesn't exist. If it's more than a 60th, it exists, and then I can't eat the soup. Okay? So what they're saying is that the dream is just on the edge. It's just on the edge. A lot of it's just nonsense.
Does that mean that the exact 1/60th is not less and not more?
Yeah, so 1/60th is on the edge. And it's on there, and a little more, and it's there, and a little less than it's exactly. It's just on that liminal place of 1/60th actually technically is on the inside, because it means that the other part is 59 to 1. But if it was less than 1/60th, it would be out. So that's it's just hanging on the edge. That's right. So that image, I think, is very telling about the idea. What does it mean, though? What does it mean, though, that it is prophecy? So in order for me, now we're going to get a little more into the serious material. After all that, let's say that a dream contains with it, from Jewish perspective, a kernel of truth, something, a little bit of wheat of truth, a little 1/60th of truth, of prophecy. So what does that mean? So I want to say a couple things about the Jewish understanding of prophecy that will help make that make sense, and then we'll look at some sources, and then we'll finish up with talk about the interpretations, and then hopefully there'll be some questions. Sound good? We're good for time? We have lots of time, right? We're good? So in the Greek tradition, I'm not a literature or a Greek mythology master, but from what I do remember reading and enjoy reading, prophecy in the Greek tradition is by an oracle or by a seer. And the purpose of the prophecy is sort of ironic, because the prophecy is what will help. Either the prophecy says what will be, it's destiny, and the more you fight the prophecy, the more you're just going to help it happen. So when Oedipus learns that he's going to kill his father, then he goes to kill his father, not knowing it's his father. Or when Cassandra warns against setting off. So the prophet's role is to reveal destiny. The destiny can't be changed. It's not a moral judgment of anybody. No one is angry at the seer. It's just you're saying what's true. They might not want it to happen, and they might fight it, but then they're just going. That's what makes a tragedy. A tragedy is that you self-fulfill it. You can't escape your destiny in a sad way. And so the voice of the prophet is only to predict what is true about the future, what is true about the rhythms of time that will take you to the future. In Jewish prophecy, just simply from a biblical perspective, and this I assume is not new to you as students of the Bible, the prophet's job is the opposite of that. There is no prophet whose goal is to tell you what will be. The prophet is uninterested in destiny, always. I'm trying to think if there's even an exception to this. The prophet's job is to avoid what he thinks, or she thinks in a few cases, is going to happen. And the only way to get you to change is to reveal how powerful your actions are in God's eyes. So if you are misbehaving in the temple, and God is upset, disappointed, angry about that, Jeremiah says he's going to destroy the temple if you don't get your act together. Get your act together, and he won't destroy the temple. The prophecy's purpose is to undermine the future that the prophet is predicting. You understand that? It's paradoxical. Jonah is the most successful prophet in Jewish tradition, partly because he was speaking to non-Jews and not to Jews. Jews are very stiff-necked, is how we call ourselves. Very difficult to get. We're aware of our own, limitations in certain ways. It's very difficult for a prophet to get Jews to change. That's a very important theme in Christian theology, I think. But in Jonah goes to the people of Nineveh. And the people of Nineveh are a great nation up in northern Assyria. And he says, in 40 days, your city's gone. God's going to wipe you all out. And they're like, oh my God, that's terrible. What do we have to do? And so they sit in sackcloth and ashes and tear their clothing, and they get very upset. And God's like, great, that was amazing. So you know what? I'm not going to destroy Nineveh. And Jonah is upset. He said, why'd you send me to these people? They think I'm a liar. Because that's the paradox of the prophet. His goal is for you to believe what he's going to say so that he will not be true, meaning that to undermine him. So that's a very, very important observation. The next statement of Rav Chisda, I know I've been all over the place, but Rav Chisda was the rabbi at the beginning who said that a dream uninterpreted is like a letter unread. The next thing he says is, a bad dream is better than a good dream. Why is a bad dream better than a good dream? So the obvious answer to me is, well, obviously. Just like if someone says, you have a really wonderful dream, feel great, you're not going to change your life. Everything's good. You had a great dream. But if you have a dream where you're terrified that you're unprepared to teach a class, and like felt today, I think I was prepared, but I was afraid when I was sleeping. So I got up this morning and I organized things and reorganized. A bad dream scares you because the goal of the dream for Rav Chisda, to the degree that it is prophecy, is to change you so that you will grow and improve. And repent is the wrong word, but it's tshuva in Hebrew, is to return to what you really were meant to be or to become. So the dream, if it scares you, has a very powerful impact. The other thing that Rav Chisda says, and it's in the source book, is that Rav Chisda says that an experienced dream doesn't need to come true. An experienced dream is enough. Meaning if you feel it, it doesn't have to become true. And it's exactly the same thing as the prophet. The prophet says Jerusalem will be destroyed. If you feel that Jerusalem is being destroyed, then God doesn't have to destroy Jerusalem because you've learned something. If God says Jerusalem will be destroyed, and you're like, okay, whatever we can do, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we'll die, then God will destroy Jerusalem. It's plain. So a dream, in that sense, Rav Chisda believes, in that sense, is a little bit of prophecy. Okay, something that can be. That's the first thing I want to point out, and it'll be very helpful as we get more into the sources. The second thing I want to point out about prophecy is that there is a tradition within. One second, just water. There are many different, and again, I don't know what you're studying in your theology, but there are many different theories about the nature of prophecy, partly because it's a mystery to us. How could God speak to a man? How could God, being not human, not bound space and time, speak to a human being who is bound in space and time? What does that mean? There's a lot of thought about that in any religious tradition. One of the most important philosophical and mystical traditions in Judaism perceives prophecy a little bit like a radio. I have to be careful saying this. This is not true about all types of prophecy, and it's certainly not true of everybody, but Put it this way, there was a great Hasidic teacher in Poland in the 1880s who asked the question like this. He said, when God told Abraham, go forth, right? Go forth, Abraham, in the beginning of Genesis. God doesn't introduce Abraham in any kind of an interesting way to make you think that God would choose Abraham. I mean, Abraham's there, and he's the son of Terach and so on, but there's nothing really about Abraham that makes him choicey, meaning why would God choose him, right? Unlike Samuel, maybe unlike Moses. Abraham is. So what was it? Says the Sfat Emet, he was a Rabbi Alter, and he brings different medieval and ancient philosophers on the topic, but his basic point is that what makes Abraham so special is not that he was chosen, but that he was listening. And that understanding of prophecy is that God is always whispering certain things into the world. It's like a radio wave, or this room's full of all sorts of radio waves that none of us can hear because we just are not tuned into. But the idea is that God whispers, go forth, go forth, go forth, everybody, all the time. Very few people are interested in, aware of, and capable of paying attention. If someone were to say, I feel that I'm being told something, I feel that I need to move, I need to get up and change and go, maybe I should pay more attention to that, I should listen to that and develop the tools to identify the voice of God within them, they might actually go through a transformation. And if they continue to develop it, they would be able to filter out all of the chaff and the nonsense and the desires and the noise and the whatever else, and actually hear the voice of God speaking to them. That's his theory. Now, he doesn't believe that necessarily that's true of Moses or of all the prophets, but it's a way of understanding how prophecy works. That's a particularly powerful way of understanding prophecy for the purposes of this, because it's primarily then an inner voice. So now if we put it all together, you have prophecy is 1/60th, dream is 1/60th of prophecy. We saw that. Good dream, a bad dream is better than a good dream. And a dream that is impactful is not necessary to be fulfilled. That's the Jewish tradition so far. We know that there are needs and desires that interfere with dreams, and that's fine. But deep down, if you're listening carefully, there's something from God for you to hear. So that's already, I think, interesting. At that stage, the question becomes, so how do you interpret? How do you know? How do you know what's true in that? So at this point, the Talmud tells the following story. I'm going to just pause for 1 second. Any questions so far? I just feel like I'm saying a lot, and I don't know how much I can assume you know about the things that I'm saying, whether you know about the Talmud and the Jewish mysticism and all these rabbis, or whether this is just a lot of nonsense. You're doing okay? Still clear? Yeah. Okay, you'll stop me though, right? I'm relying on you to stop. My kids would stop, my students would have stopped me a long time ago, no matter what.
It's a different tradition.
Different tradition, okay, good. You're gonna let me exhaust myself and then you're gonna, okay. So the question of interpretation. So this now gets into, these are big questions, but they're very interesting in this context. The Talmud tells a story at that stage about a rabbi who says, I grew up in Jerusalem before it was destroyed, so before the year 70. When I was young, there were 24 dream interpreters in Jerusalem. This is in the Talmud. 24. 24 is an interesting number because 24 is the number of books in the Jewish Bible. So I have a hunch that it's not an accident that he said 24, but I don't know. I once dreamt a dream, he said, and I went to every single one of them, curious. And they all gave me different interpretations. And they all came true. That's interesting. He could have said, I don't dream, I don't need dreams. He could have said, I found the guy, he told me it was fine. I went to all of them, they all didn't disagree, it's all a bunch of nonsense. They all disagreed, and they all were true is already interesting. Now, I think that story carries within it a very important kernel of something profoundly true about Jewish tradition. And it's this faith and this trust that a kernel of truth can be interpreted many different ways, contradictory, and that's just fine. So, put parenthetically, because of the kind of work that I do teaching in yeshiva, but I also do a lot of work as I mentioned, I'm a chef. So I do cook very fancy dinners in my home, and people from around the world come. It's like a salon. People come and order in advance. They pay, and then they come and have a big dinner with us. And so we've had the the bishops' conference from Germany. We've had every black churches from Detroit. We have people from all around the world come, and so I maintain correspondence with a lot of religious figures. Not the Pope, but people are very significant. One of the things that is most difficult for the middle tier, I'd say. I gave a talk at a monastery recently about a Talmudic conversation. The hardest thing for them was the fact that there are several different. I gave a talk about the nature of the Messiah in Jewish tradition. It was a very popular lecture. Everybody came. And maybe I could have given that here and then everyone. So and I said there are several different opinions, and they were like, so what's the answer? I said, well, no, there's no answer until we go. We'll ask them. But in the meantime, there are multiple ways of understanding what the Messiah is. They might all be correct. And that was very difficult. There were one or two of them that could run with that. The rest were, Dad is crazy. We thought you were crazy already. Now we know you're crazy. I had a theological debate. I went to a evangelical church in the South of the United States. I gave a talk there. And they asked a question. I said, well, there are really three opinions mainstream opinions within Orthodox Judaism, which is right. I said, well, they're all right. But they contradict. That's okay. But none of us in Orthodox Jewish thought, none of us has clarity about the whole picture. It's impossible. It's only for God. So you only have clarity of your picture. And if you're good, you can get a good picture. But it's still only going to be one picture of many. And even if there are contradictions, ultimately you have to resolve them. That's a fundamental aspect of Jewish thought. Every student in every yeshiva in Israel understands that as part of his blood, doesn't need to think about it. There's always multiple opinions. Give you an example. If I have a question about anything important, let's say really important, let's say a question of, in Jewish law, abortion is not clear. It's a life, it's not a life. It's in the gray area. For that reason, there are rabbis who say you cannot have an abortion unless it's a very extreme case. And there are rabbis who are very, very liberal, very, very liberal, and say it's fine to have an abortion. It's better to have an abortion than not to have an abortion if under a lot of considerations. Okay, it's a wide range. If you were to go to a rabbi and say, listen, what should I do? I have Down syndrome in the fetus, or financially our family's a total mess. My husband and I are not getting along. We can't function with another child. I don't know. And the rabbi is against abortion. The rabbi will say, listen, if you were to ask me, and I asked you, no, if you were to ask me, I think it's better for you to go to that rabbi, whom I disagree with tooth and nail, but he'll give you an answer that is better for you and is true, even though I can't stand the guy and I would never listen to him and I don't like anything he says and I disagree with him. That's the kind of understanding of truth that is extremely common in Judaism. And again, that's what this rabbi is saying. I had 24 interpretations. Now, how is that possible? So for this, I want to end. We have another few minutes. I want to go into a Jewish mystical understanding of the answer to that question. First of all, I just want to say that's extremely mainstream in Judaism. On every question you'll ever ask, just about in Judaism, you'll say, well, there's three answers to that. And you read the Talmud, which I welcome you to do. It's a very exciting text. And at the end, they just move on to the next topic. And you're like, well, what's the answer? There is no answer. You have to figure that out yourself. How you take the underlying principles that we reveal to you here and apply them is your business. You're going to have to figure that out. The Talmud rarely tries to tell you what to do. It creates the parameters of the discussion. But then from there on, you have to, and that's why you can have many rabbis disagree. So Jewish mysticism, and again, I don't know it is Prague, so I would think that one of the greatest Jewish mystics of all time, the Maharal, just lived down the street from here. In fact, I'm giving a talk in Las Vegas in another month, and a Jewish woman is bringing me in to give a talk. There's a church there and a synagogue, and the woman, we spoke yesterday, and she said, where is I? I'm in Prague. She said, oh, my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather is buried next to the Maharal of Prague, who was one of the great Reb Landau. I studied him. So one of the greatest Kabbalists of all time is buried just down the road. The Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah, is obviously very complex. There are many, 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 many different layers and nuances. I'm going to refer, though, to a very basic concept which is true everywhere in the Kabbalah, which is the idea that give you a metaphor for it, which makes it easier to understand without going into all the terminology. If someone already has studied Kabbalah, I don't know how much Kabbalah studies you do here, but if someone has studied or wants to know a bit more, again, I'll give you my email. You're welcome to be in touch and I can explain. And some of the sources I have here. Imagine a person, a young man, let's say, I can identify with this when I was younger, wakes up one morning after being a wild, doing whatever he does, realizing he really wants a home. I don't know how old you guys are, but this could be. It's a home. He's been out, been partying, lots of women, lots of studies, interesting, but now he wants a home. It's a very powerful feeling. He doesn't know quite what to do with it. Doesn't know what a home would look like, who he wants to live with the family, 8 kids, 2 kids, 1 kid, doesn't know. Does he want to live by the sea? Does he want to live in the city? He has no idea. He just wants a home, but he knows he wants a home. If he takes that seriously, he'll begin to develop that. So he'll start to say, well, where do I want to live? I don't want to live in the city, it's too busy. I want to live on the coast, so I'll move to the coast. I'll buy a piece of land. Do I want wind? Do I want light? Do I want what metal, what material, brick, stone, and so on and so on and so on. He'll start to plan it. He'll go with an architect. And at every stage along the way, what he builds, so long as he's true to his original desire, will be a correct manifestation of what he wants. But at every stage, there are a million options. Doesn't have to, he wants to live on the coast. He could live in England, or he could live in Belgium. He could live in Canada. He could live in Israel. There are many ways. Once he chooses one, all the other options fall away. And now there are a million other options. He wants a lot of light, but does that mean he wants big windows? Does that mean he wants a sky? You understand what I'm saying? The way that you differentiate an underlying desire or yearning or will, as it goes through will, I'm speaking specifically in the Kabbalah, the will is above you, through your mind, which starts to make sense of it, through your emotions, which is how does it feel, to your hands, which is the action, and concretely make something, every stage in that process, there are 5, constricts the options, but also expands the possibilities. It constricts the number of options, but it makes it real so you can actually do something. As if a guy sits in theological school, I don't mean you personally, but here in Prague, wants to build a home, but doesn't do anything about it, and is living with his 3 roommates who can't get the dishes done on time. He's not going to have a house. You got to get serious. You got to make some money. You got to get married. You got to do things to get a home. So to make it real, you have to do stuff. But to do stuff, you have to cut off options. If there's one person you want to marry, it's only her. You can't marry all the other women who want to marry you. It's only her. So it's about limiting and also. Here's the interesting thing. If I want to interpret a person's deeper sense of self, I can cut in at every stage and offer many interpretations, even though the practical reality will be specific. So I could say, you want a home, that tells me something about what God's whispering to you, let's say, or psychologically. The practical consequences will be specific for you because you can only build 1 home or 2 homes, but you can't. You understand what I'm saying? If I can cut back in, so if, for example, God says to Moses, keep the Sabbath, okay? Now, what is a Sabbath? What day of the week? What does it look like? What can I do? What can I not do? And then you can imagine, if you've studied Talmud, there are hundreds of thousands of pages of discussion. What does Sabbath look like? Can I light a fire? Can I carry something? And by the time you get to the year 2024, there are very, very precise rules about what the Sabbath looks like. But the concept of the Sabbath, if I go deeper into it at every different stage, I can discover a lot of things about what God wants from me. Do you understand? So if a dream interpreter comes to the dream and picks out where in the process they want to interpret, the message from God could be different from another person. Because where in that line of development of the idea coming into fruition, to reality, or God coming into practicality, does the dream interpreter set in? So again, I could give you a lot of examples, just give you one little example of interpretation not of a dream, but of a verse in the Bible, but it's the same idea. Noah steps into, how do you translate it into Czech? I don't know, but Noah steps in English into when Noah, the flood. So he builds what is it called in English? An ark, right? All right. In Hebrew, the word is teva. Teva. The word ark appears in the Bible where else? In English, the Ark of the Covenant. But that's not teva, so it doesn't matter. It's an incorrect interpretation. It's a poor translation. If you were to think, what is an ark? You'd say Ark of the Covenant. That's interesting, but it's not. It's totally different words. In Hebrew, the ark is what Moses is placed into. So that's interesting. That means that there's a parallel between the 2 stories. A man who is the future is placed. And it's interesting. You would start to compare the stories and learn a lot about Moses and about Noah. But it's also true that teva, the word teva, with me still, means word, the word, like word, spoken word. And the mystical interpretation of Noah entering the teva, the ark, is that he prayed. Because for a very intensely, powerfully spiritual person, to pray is to build, not all prayers are the same, but to build a structure of words. If you pray with liturgy, this is true. I don't know if you pray spontaneously, it's probably a little different. But you pray with liturgy, you step into the words and you lose your sense of independence outside of the words you've created, and your connection with God helps you stay afloat. The world goes into total craziness and starts to sink. You live in the Czech Republic, which is a relatively calm place these days. I live in Israel, which is anything but calm. And it is very powerful to step into a study house or into a synagogue and to open up to pray and to feel that I'm in a space in which God is around me. So what did Noah do? He stepped into the Word, they say. Now, it's not that he didn't step into an ark. Of course he stepped into an ark. But he also stepped into the words of prayer. It doesn't mean that Noah prayed. It means that the dynamic is the same thing. Am I making sense? The dynamic of Noah stepping into the ark is a matter of trust. That won't leak, won't sink. God will make it float. There will be a day after. There's a lot of hope in stepping into an ark. The same thing is in prayer. They're the same thing, just on totally different planes. That's why the interpretations work. I have studied some Christian theology. When I read the Christian Bible, at least the Gospels, the stories of Jesus, it's every second page or every second word, pretty much, especially Matthew, is every second word is this is what it says in the Old. This is how it applies to Jesus. So from a Jewish perspective, that's pretty legitimate. You have a reading of the Bible. You see that reflected in the life of the person that you admire the most. That's reasonable. It's just in Jewish tradition, you can't use that to cut off the original one because then you're adrift. That's just a Jewish interpretation. So if you have an interpretation, they have to work together. They can't cancel one out. So the idea on a mystical understanding is that as something comes from nothingness into being, it goes through stages, specific, very clear specific stages. Just like the young man, his desire to have a home comes from nowhere, comes in and becomes something concrete. The way, so far so good? I didn't lose you yet? So the last thing I want to bring in is that there is a specific Talmudic, but also later on mystical tradition that helps explain this and gets very, very interesting in terms of dreams. So if it's not too much and everyone's still with me, I'll tell you. The soul, Judaism believes in a soul and an eternal soul. The soul has 5 names in Judaism. That doesn't mean that there are 5 souls. There's one soul, but it has 5 different names. Just like I have many different names. He calls me one name, my wife another name, my mother another name, my students another name. Yeah, I was called Rabbi Joshua. Right? What was I in Czech? Don't you add the at the end?
Joshua
Weisberga, isn't it? Don't you add that? I was thinking in the bookstore. No, doesn't matter. Many different names. They all refer to me, but they're all going to call out a different aspect of me. So when my son says Abba, which is Hebrew for father, then it'll call the Abba. You know, if my mother says Yoshi, which is how she called me when I was a little boy, she's bringing out the boy. Everyone call. So it has many different names for one essence. The 2 names that are important for us are Nefesh. Can I write it? This is important. I don't want to overwhelm you with information, but you can read the piece afterwards. There's Nefesh. Okay, there's Nefesh, and there's Ruach. These are the 2 lower names. There's Neshama, there's a third, a second, and a first, a different. Neshama, they all refer to different aspects of the soul, but you don't need to know that right now. This is what's important. Nefesh is the aspect of the soul, okay? Nefesh, the aspect of the soul that keeps you alive. So your blood is driven by your nefesh. Your breath is by your nefesh. If you stop breathing or your blood stops flowing, you die. There's not a lot of options. So your nefesh is what gives the vitality to your physical body. Your nefesh also has the fundamental drives to it. I want to be, I want to live. It's the physical, it's what drives the physical to be. Okay? It gets more complicated than that, obviously, but that's the sexual desire. But The nefesh is just a manifestation of the higher one, which is just a manifestation of the higher. It's in the same way that the young man has it. The will to have a home is manifested in the will to have a home here. But it's still the will to have a home. So the desires of the body of the person are reflections of something happening higher up that I'm a little bit unaware of. The ruach is the part of the soul that doesn't have to be in the body all the time. It can go off wandering around. So when I sleep, I'm pretty much in one space. Nothing's going to happen to me. The nefesh has to stay there because otherwise I'll die. But my ruach can go off. It doesn't need me. I don't need it. The ruach is a spiritual side of a person that you develop. If you're a highly developed person spiritually, you have a ruach that has character, that has sensitivity, that has subtlety, that has purity. If you're a very base person, then your ruach is very base. It's not going to go very far because the spiritual worlds are full of energies, in Jewish tradition, full of them. So your ruach goes up at night and it bumps into a lot of bad characters, and they're like pushing it around. And I'm being deliberately humorous, even though that's exactly what it says in the Zohar. And it says, and they come around, they tell it nonsense, they tell things that might happen, they're just pushing it. But your ruach is base, it doesn't understand much because you're not a very developed person. And then it comes back to the body when you wake up in the morning. Obviously not physical, it's a spiritual movement. And you wake up and it tells the nefesh, hey, you won't believe what I just experienced, blah, 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 and that's your dream. Okay? If you have a refined ruach, you go up and you'll meet with higher and higher and higher spiritual entities, existence, angels. Again, I don't want to get into complicated things that require their own class, but you encounter spiritual forces that then will tell you truths about what God wants from you in the world. That's exciting. It comes down to you in the morning. You wake up with a dream. The dream is a manifestation of a truth that was revealed to your ruach. That's the Kabbalistic way of understanding dreams. So the trick is, but the way that my ruach speaks to me gets interpreted by all sorts of stuff that's happening to me. How do you filter out and hear the voice of the ruach in the dream? So the idea at the end of the day is that you're possible to identify that thread of truth that's whispering to you in your dream or in your life, if you're really sensitive. When I became religious, we have 10 very holy days between our New Year, Rosh Hashanah, and our Day of Atonement, which is Yom Kippur. It's a 10-day period. It's a very emotional period, very intense, a lot of preparation, a lot of prayer. And my rabbi took me aside and said, this is your first time doing this series. I'm going to tell you a secret. I still remember this. At one point in these 10 days, you're going to get very emotional about repentance. I promise you. There'll be one moment, whether you're praying, whether you're going for a walk, whether you're hanging out, where you're going to get very emotional. You're going to want to change. The reason that happens at that moment is that at that moment, your soul, your ruach, is being called before God and being asked to be accountable for who it has become. Now, you don't know that because you're not aware of what's going on in your ruach. But your ruach is experiencing very intense emotions because it's going through standing before God. You will experience that in your life as a sudden urge to change your life, to do better in your life. I want you to know that that's your ruach whispering to you, so you'll know what to do at the right moment. Isn't that interesting? So again, it sounds a little bit childish in the sense that it's reducing it to a story, but it also conceals a very powerful story, which is be aware of the underlying emotions that you have, because you may feel them one way, but they're whispering something much, much, much deeper to you. That's plus minus what I want to say. I just want to end with Roland and Freud. Can I do that? Another 2 minutes, 3 minutes?
Yes,
Number done?
yes.
So Freud wrote back to Roland and he said, I know what you're talking about. He actually took a long time to write back, I think more than a year. Not because he was a poor correspondent, because he said that's a very powerful question. It's powerful for Freud because Freud believed that it was all contained, that you can explain everything that goes on, it's all there. And Roland is saying, what about the experience of not being contained? What about the oceanic experience of being part of the world, part of existence, religious experience? Because if Freud has no explanation for that, then he's open up to attack from his religious right. So Freud says, well, it's a memory. It's a trace memory of infancy when you were being nursed and you felt loved and contained and held, and everything was there and the boundaries between you and your mother were not clear, and that was the most beautiful, wonderful thing for you. And you remembered that. You don't remember it, but your unconscious remembers it. And every once in a while, you trigger that memory, you feel very strongly. You hear the similarities between the ruach whispering to the, it's interesting. And he said it's an infantile thing. Infantile. I love that word because it's ambiguous. And infantile can mean as like an infant, and it can mean infantile. Freud meant it to sound ambiguous because he meant it to be dismissive. That's very important. Freud, in that specific piece, and I showed this to several German speakers to make sure, it could go either way. But Freud didn't want, he wanted to sound like it could go either way, but he didn't want it to go either way. He was very dismissive. Freud was consistently dismissive of religious experience because it threatened the underlying assumption, not of his whole language, but of his control over the language. What's interesting about that story, this is really remarkable, is that Freud was very dramatically influenced by his Jewish upbringing, even though he always denied that. And there are many, you can look it up, there's a lot of books on this, it's a fascinating topic. But that specific story of a trace memory is actually in the Talmud, almost identical to the way he told it, even though he never admitted that. And it's a story of a fetus, not a nursing child, but it's the same story. There's a lot there. But the idea is the same thing. The idea is that we have imprinted on us in our deeper unconscious awareness, we have imprinted very powerful experiences of what we want our life to be like. We want love, like we experience love from our mother. We want whatever our ruach tells us. Our ruach goes before God and says, God wants you to be good. Go forth to Abraham. All of these things are things that are being whispered to your soul, which come through what we now call our unconscious. But I think, in that sense, at least for me as a religious person, unlike Freud, who limits it as an entirely internal thing, the source of it all is coming from beyond. So I don't know if that was helpful in terms of understanding your own dreams, although I recommend keeping a dream journal. It's fun to do, and you really discover some interesting things. I wouldn't put too much stock in interpreting your old dreams. Find someone who knows what they're doing, just because you don't know what you'll come up with. And it's important to surprise you. But I hope it was interesting and gave you a bit of a taste of what it's like to approach a universally intriguing question, but from a specifically, uniquely Jewish perspective.
Thank you.
There you go. I hope that was interesting.